One of the most common questions that I've been getting on my stream as of late, one that I generally have not had an answer to, is the Bitcoin farm worth it? Well, I don't know. Now at this point, I'm finally curious enough to dive in, do a little bit of research, and try and come up with an answer to that question for myself and for all of you guys. So let's start with what the Bitcoin farm is and what it does. Bitcoin farm is a hideout crafting station that generates, of course, Bitcoins. Now all that's required is graphics cards, power, and time. At the current moment, the graphics cards you put into the Bitcoin farm are not consumed. They don't have any durability, they don't go away after any period of time, so keep that in mind, but of course this can change at any time. The Bitcoin farm generates Bitcoins at regular intervals as long as your hideout has fuel, the power's on, and you have at least one graphics card installed, and it hasn't produced 3 uncollected Bitcoins. Now before I get any further into this video was made mid-April of 2020. All of the requirements, cost, and sales values are based on the current state of the game and economy, and I'm going to be rounding many of them off anyway for simplicity and brevity's sake. If you're watching this at any point in the far future, realize that the specifics may be different. Maybe future Veritas will make an updated video if I'm still interested in this in the future and it becomes drastically different. This is where I'm going to put any annotations in the corner of the screen or anything like that, which will direct you to any theoretical future videos that I make one day. Maybe not. But until then, apply the concepts that I'm going to share in this video to whatever the current state of the game is right now when you're watching this, and use that information to be able to figure out for yourself what's best for you. Now that we have that out of the way, what does it take to create the Bitcoin farm? Now, creating the Bitcoin farm is a decently long process requiring a number of fairly expensive items and a modest time for construction for each level. Level 1 takes about 24 hours to construct, provides slots for 10 graphics cards, and requires the following items: 10 CPU fans, 5 power supply units, 5 power cords, 1 electric drill, and it's required that you have a level 2 intelligence center. Level 2 takes 36 hours to construct, provides an additional 15 GPU slots, and requires the following items: 15 CPU fans, 5 power supply units, 5 printed circuit boards, 2 phase control relays, and a level 3 generator. Now finally, level 3 takes 72 hours to construct, adds the final 25 GPU slots for a grand total of 50, and requires the following items: 25 CPU fans, 10 silicone tubes, 1 electric motor, 2 pressure gauges, and level 1 solar power and level 3 water collector. So for the sake of this discussion, I think it's fair to leave out a bunch of the costs related to upgrading the Bitcoin station, such as the prerequisite station upgrades for the other stations, things like fuel, or any of the costs or savings associated with trying to farm any of these items in raids, because honestly, there's an infinite number of factors to consider and ain't nobody got time for that. For all intents and purposes, let's just assume that everything in the hideout has already been upgraded, separate from the Bitcoin farm itself, and now you're just trying to decide whether or not investing in the Bitcoin farm is going to be worth it for us. Let's also assume that you haven't found any of these items in raid, that you've just been selling them on the flea market or whatever, and now that you've decided that you want to, you're going to be purchasing all of the items on the flea market. Again, this seems like really the only practical way to analyze the cost-benefit of the Bitcoin farm. So, doing that, is it worth it? Well, in order to know if it's worth it, we need to know what our Bitcoin farm's ROI is. And we know the Bitcoin farm takes, at a minimum, 6 days of construction time and approximately 1.2 million rubles to make. Now, thanks to the fine folks over at the Tarkov wiki, we know that the Bitcoin farm production rate is governed by the following formula. From this formula, we can generate a graph showing the production rate of Bitcoin as a function of 2 inputs: the number of graphics cards in the generator and production time, or Bitcoin per hour. As you can see by the shape of this graph, and in fact, has diminishing returns. Going from 1 GPU to 2 GPUs decreases the time it takes to generate a Bitcoin from 20 hours to 19, whereas adding the final GPU, so going from 49 to 50, decreases the production time by a fraction of that, which saves you around 5 minutes. So what can we do with this information? Well, I get asked all the time how many graphics cards you need to put in your Bitcoin farm, and never really have an answer until now. Because the Bitcoin farm generates 3 Bitcoins and then ceases all production until those 3 are collected, anytime that your hideout is powered on and you are not actively producing Bitcoin is essentially wasted time. Now, this is more significant than you may think. Let me give you a ridiculous example to kind of showcase what I'm talking about here. Let's say your ex-wife took your gaming PC in the divorce, but she was at least kind enough to give you 1 hour of visitation time every Saturday once a week. Now, even if you could put 1,000 GPUs into your farm and generate 3 Bitcoin in an hour, you could only collect those 3 on that one day. So the rest of the time your Bitcoin would be sitting idle full. Now, all of those GPUs are not actually giving you any extra value. Now, if instead of 50, you only put 1 GPU in the farm, because it takes 20 hours at that point to generate a Bitcoin, you're still able to collect the same 3 Bitcoin per week. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that the question of how many GPUs you should put in your Bitcoin farm is not only a function of GPUs and in-game time, but just as important in this equation is your actual real-life schedule. Now, due to the design of this feature, the number of GPUs you should put into your farm is based largely on how often you can collect your Bitcoin. So let's take into consideration that input into the equation and see if we can visually represent this in a different way to help answer the question. So the following graph is really similar to the previous graph, except it shows the data in a bit more of a pragmatic way for this discussion. Instead of showing the GPU count relative to Bitcoin production time in hours, we slightly alter the graph to reflect not in hours to generate a single Bitcoin, but instead reflect the number of days to generate 3 Bitcoin. Why is this useful? Well, what you can do now is determine how often you're likely to be able to get in front of your computer, launch Tarkov, and collect your Bitcoins, and then use that interval to tell you the optimal number of graphics cards to put in your Bitcoin farm. For example, I really only launch Tarkov once per day, typically at night after work when I stream. This means that approximately once every 24 hours was when I can collect my Bitcoin and start processing the next batch. So looking at this graph, there's really no point in keeping more than about 25 graphics cards in my Bitcoin farm. In this case, once a day when I log in is basically right about the time where that 3rd Bitcoin is going to be finished in production. And once I figured this out, I actually sold my extra 25 GPUs, which made me back over 8 million rubles that I had originally invested in graphics cards that then I can, put towards buying gear and helping finish quests. Now, if you're a bit more casual and only play 3 times a week, that means that you can only collect 9 Bitcoin in a week. So you really only want to produce 9 Bitcoin in a week, which is about 1.3 per day. Now that translates to a production of a single Bitcoin approximately every 18 hours or so. So in this case, you're not really getting any benefit out of putting more than 3 graphics cards into your Bitcoin farm. So showing this in a different way, let's look at a calendar. Let's say you play Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. You boot up the game, grab some gas, start up your generator, and kick on your Bitcoin farm with 3 GPUs in it. Now after just over 55 hours, the 3rd and final Bitcoin will have been produced and your farm will stop production. Now you normally pop on at 11 p.m. on Tuesday nights to get a few raids in with your friends, collect your 3 Bitcoin. So about 6 a.m. Friday morning rolls around, and right before work you log into your Bitcoin farm, see it just finished producing its last Bitcoin, do a scav run or 2, and then this sets you up again to collect another 3 Sunday afternoon one more time. Maybe you are, someone young in school, or maybe it's summertime, or maybe you work from home and you can log in anytime and, collect your Bitcoins all day. Maybe you find yourself, right now doing a little bit of social distancing, so you have the ability to, again, log on as much as you want. In this case, you're probably going to want to maximize the amount that you can make and simply max out with the 50 GPUs, and probably want to do something like, set a timer on your phone or something to collect your Bitcoin every 15 hours. Use this chart to help figure out how many graphics cards makes the most sense for you, so you can ensure that you have your Bitcoin farm sitting idle for as little as possible. So with all that in mind, all of the investment and costs associated with leveling up the farm and filling it with GPUs, how long would it take before your farm becomes profitable? Now, assuming it costs about 1.2 million rubles to purchase all of the required items needed to craft a level 1, 2, and 3 farm, and assuming an average price of about 330,000 rubles right now per graphics card, to max out and fill the Bitcoin farm costs somewhere in the ballpark of 18 million rubles. Now at 50 graphics cards, you can produce 1 Bitcoin every 5 hours, and assuming about 145,000 rubles per Bitcoin, that means it takes about 124 Bitcoin to pay back the initial investment, which takes about 25 days. Now at that point, you'll be generating just under 5 Bitcoin or 700,000 rubles daily, as long as you're regularly collecting them and have fuel in your generator. Let's say you're one of the ones that can only collect once per day. Is there even a reason to upgrade to the level 3 Bitcoin farm for those last 25 slots if you're not going to use them? As far as I know, no. Now, if you're a completionist like me and hate having things unfinished, that's a different story. But let's take a look at the cost and profitability of a level 2 Bitcoin farm. Given that the price of GPUs is by far the biggest slice of the total investment here, compared to the junk that we need to build the first 2 levels of the farm, I'd expect us to be about half the total cost of the prior example. So totaling all the costs up here brings us just under 9 million rubles, which is basically what we estimated. Now at 25 graphics cards, you can produce 1 Bitcoin every 8 hours, and at 145k per Bitcoin, that means that it takes about 62 Bitcoin to pay back the initial investment. So it would take just under 21 days to break even. So after that, you'll be generating about 420,000 rubles daily. So with all that in mind, what are you going to do? Did you learn anything different or novel here? Is this a different perspective maybe you hadn't considered before? Are you going to max out the farm? You're going to go halfway? You're only going to put 1 in there at level 1 and let it ride? Does anyone think that this information is going to change, the Bitcoin farm meta, potentially, changing the demand and thus the cost of graphics cards? I'm curious to know what's going to happen. If you have any ideas for anything else you want me to dive into in future videos, let me know in the comments, and leave me a like and a subscription if you guys appreciate the work that I put into these videos. Thanks for watching until the end. Good luck out there. Peace.